Appreciate you coming in this morning to talk a little bit about younger people's ways of learning, and particularly younger people's ways of learning through play. I think it's something that's actually very present in this conference. I've noticed a lot of sessions about games, about playing, about math and play, and so on. So what I'm coming here to do today with you is to share a little bit of my experience and my story with play and learning. Thank you. Sorry about that. So I wanted to first present myself. My name is Cécile Doyen, and I am actually originally from Belgium, having gone through the US, now based in the Netherlands. I work with the IB, the International Baccalaureate Organization. How many of you here today are actually in an IB school or a candidate school? Okay, thank you. And the workshop leaders, okay. So I'm going to bring a little bit of that international baccalaureate flavor into this presentation, but it's also, I think, something to reflect on whether or not you're in an IB school, because we're all very concerned about children's well-being and letting them actually learn in the best way that they know how to learn, which is play. So, but what is play to you? I always like to come back to personally, individually. What's a word that comes to mind when you think of play? Well, yeah, I say turn to someone, but you can go ahead, yeah? To engage in an activity for enjoyment and recreation rather than a serious or practical purpose. You can Google it, actually. You don't have to take an actual photo of that. And also, by the way, I'm going to refer to a lot of literature references and so on. I will give you all that if you send me an email. At the end, I have my email posted, so I can send you the slides, and I can also send you all the references. So don't worry too much about taking a whole lot of notes. So this, when I read this, actually, I found this a bit concerning. I found it great because it's talking about fun, all the great things you've talked about this morning so far. But also it said that it's actually an opposite to something serious. And it's actually the opposite of something purposeful. It kind of led me to wonder, how can we actually try to maybe in our schools, but also in our lives, raise the validity of play and bring actually some purpose to it. So this is a little bit of the story, my story with play in my profession as a curriculum developer in The Hague with the IB, but also as a child. So I turned to my father and I said, all right, do you remember me playing when I was a little girl? And he said, sure. And I said, well, can you send me some pictures of that? You know, I always like to put personal things in my presentation. So I said, okay, just send me a few of them. And he sent me this one. I was like, he remembers when I was going to play in the garden. That was my favorite place to play, actually, in the nature, in the grass, and so on. And I was very happy. I enjoyed myself. I was always coming back with, little constructions I had made with little sticks and things like that. And then, actually, in the little stack of pictures, he actually sent me this one as well. The story behind that one is that I grew up with 3 brothers. So let me tell you, play was not always all fun and games. Play was actually challenging. But today, as I stand today, I'm actually very grateful for those 3 brothers of mine because of what they have taught me through play with them. Yes, it was challenging. We had to negotiate a lot. We had to make our ways. We had to make peace afterwards. But it was a great opportunity for us to learn together in the family. So the purpose of the session, well, there's several things I'd like to do. Basically, there's a little bit about sharing this information about the International Baccalaureate in an IB education. I'd like to explore some approaches to learning and teaching through play. Obviously, we're going to focus on play as inquiry. So you've been to a lot of different sessions probably where we're looking at play in a very specific context of a discipline like math, or play with word games, language, and so on. What I'm going to do is looking at play as the inquiry. So if you're going through this presentation, every time we talk about play, try to switch back and forth and thinking, play and inquiry, can we switch them back and forth, okay? And then we're going to enhance our teacher toolkit. You need tools when you get back to your classroom. You need some ideas. Are these the only ideas that are out there? Definitely not. But maybe you're going to come away with one idea, 2 ideas of things you can actually do in your classroom. And we're going to connect to the student's development of the IB learner profile. I'm going to go back to that in a little bit because some of you might not be familiar with it. And then we're going to challenge ourselves to include a bit more play in our classrooms and our schools. Okay? So you still with me? Yeah? So I've talked a lot about play as a personal thing. Now we're going to go into play as something that we find in our schools, in our classrooms, something that children actually engage in as learners. So I've gone around the world actually with this presentation, and in a lot of places I've tried to visit schools, and I always ask the adults, so when you think about play in the classroom, what do you think about? And usually I hear a lot of different things, but the one image that sticks in my mind when they try to describe play is this. They're like, oh, play is great when we can actually just teach a few games, but if you let the kids play, this is what's going to happen to your classroom, right? This is this image that some people actually convey. They don't say it like that. They don't say, oh, it's pure chaos. But there is this fear behind the adult's perspective on play that if you let the children play, this is what's going to happen. Then I also asked the children, I said, do you play in the classroom? Do you play with your teacher? Do you play, actually when you're learning in the classroom? And I say, yeah. And the story usually goes like this. I say, yeah, we do a lot of games. We do some games. In some schools, they actually do no games, which is a very sad situation. And when they describe how they play and how they actually engage in games, they say, well, the teacher wanted us to know all the multiplication table, so we just did some flashcards and we did this game. And I thought, this is interesting. What they're actually describing is what you find in the literature on gaming and games. It's called the chocolate-covered broccoli. It doesn't look good, does it? I've never tried it personally, so I can't even make a judgment there. But what we're trying to do sometimes with children in play and games, we have an agenda. So I want the kids to know math and some math facts. I want to make it a little bit more fun. So I'm just going to do quickly a game on it. But really, there is no initiative from the children. It's really my agenda as a teacher. So it's a little bit like you're trying to make the children eat some broccoli because you know it's good for them. You know they might not quite like it, so you're kind of like putting a layer of something on top of it, like chocolate on top of broccoli. So if you actually Google chocolate-covered broccoli, you'll find this notion a lot in the gaming industry. But I think you can identify sometimes some of the practices I've also done in my classroom when I was a teacher, where sometimes you're like, it's actually not the agenda of the child, it's actually my agenda, and I'm just putting something on top of it to make it more fun. Now, I'm not saying that that's bad. I think anything that we can do to make it more fun for the children, by all means, do it. But what I would like to do today is to look at play beyond the chocolate-covered broccoli. Because I know you're quite skilled at finding games, exchanging ideas around games. But what I would like to do is to try to think of children's play maybe as a bit more than chocolate-covered broccoli, right? So what's the recipe? You say, okay, no chocolate-covered broccoli, so what's the recipe? What's the good stuff here? And what's the perfect combination? So I'd like to bring something here, and a lot of the research I'm going to talk about and present here is actually coming from some engagements I've had with the Lego Foundation. If you actually Google them and try to find them online, the Lego Foundation does a lot of research on play and learning. They have a fabulous webpage with tons of reports and research on this. So I would strongly advise you to go to that website and check it out. But why is there no one recipe? Well, if you tell me that, what's the recipe? How do I do math and language and play and also the parents' expectation and this and that and everything that's in your context, it's a lot of different bricks to put together. What's the one perfect combination? There is no one perfect combination. So the question for this is a bit of a trick for the ones who like the math exercise. So how many unique combinations do you think that we can make with 6 identical Lego bricks? 36? Okay, another guess? More or less than 36? More? Right, so there's many, many more. Actually, if you were to take 6 Lego bricks and put them in different combinations, I have to write it because I can't memorize that, it's too long. It's 915,103,765 unique combination. And if you don't believe me, I have some Lego bricks in my bag here, so we can start now, and maybe by the end of the day we might be done, I'm not sure. But yeah, this was actually done and tried. So all this to say, actually, my point is that I'm not here to bring you one recipe. You have so many factors to take into account. You have so many things in your school that I'm not even aware sometimes. So I'm not coming here to say this is the one recipe. I'm just here to give a few ideas on things that you might actually try to in your school. And I always welcome feedback and saying, I've tried this, I've tried that, that doesn't work. Of course, also in this session, at the end of the session, I'd like to leave some time for you to tell me more about your story with play in your schools. So in IB schools, I wanted to make a short reference to the IB learner profile here because some of you might not be as familiar with it. In IB schools, something that we can anchor ourselves into when we're thinking about young children's way of developing and what we're trying to achieve with the children, it's a vision for learners that they actually will learn through life. And this is what we call the IB learner profile. We also have an approach to teaching and learning that's called inquiry-based. So what I'd like to do, actually, because some of you are familiar with it, some of you are not, I'm going to pass over some attributes of the learner profile. These are the 10 attributes. So we have 10 outcomes for learners in IB education. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass you some of these attributes. And I'd like you to think about when I'm trying to think of outcomes for learners and why, even in the first place, I became a teacher. What am I seeking to develop with these students? What am I trying to get them to learn? And I would like you to read the attribute that you have on your paper. And then think about one of the descriptors. So there is an attribute and there is a description, right? And I'd like you to think about this attribute and think in terms of what's going on in your classroom, the children that you're basically dealing with every day, and think about, is this something that you can actually resonate with? This is the IBs, but maybe in your schools you have a different set. Maybe you have different kinds of outcomes. There is one yesterday that was shared in the plenary, which I really liked, and I cannot remember the lady's name, but she was the head of the school for boys and girls. Haifa, yeah. And she shared that one of the visions for the students that one of these schools had was that they were initiators. I thought initiators, so to initiate. And I thought, this is kind of interesting. So I'm giving you a few more outcomes here. They're pulled from this learner profile, but think about your own practice. So I'll ask you to take one of those and pass some to your neighbors. Just one and pass it. And I'd like you to read it for yourself. Think about the students you have and think that, is there one thing in that description that I too believe I need to develop in students? Is there one thing in that description that you feel this is why I became a teacher? Obviously, you all have different ones. We're going to come back to the learner profile, but I wanted you to connect with it, at least one of the attributes on a personal level, because we can talk about pedagogy, we can talk about play, we can talk about growing with the children, but we need to talk about the purpose, right? Remember that quote from Google? that definition from Google. If you take the purpose out of it, we can talk about all kinds of good ideas, but it's probably going to be void of the most meaningful thing, which is what are we trying to achieve with the students? So I trust that you have your own sets, probably in your schools. This is the one we're going to work with today because I come from the IB. I used to be an IB teacher as well. I also taught in non-IB schools. So there's a lot of things here that we can talk about in terms of outcomes for students, but we're going to talk about these later on, okay? So as I said, I'm not coming here with a recipe, but I am going to give you a formula to remember or to sort of entertain in your mind and then try in your practice. Why am I going to give you a formula? Because sometimes it's just easier when it sticks in your head. And the formula goes a little bit like this. So at the bottom, if we're trying to develop, if the goal is to develop the 10 attributes of the learner profile, well, how do we do that through play? Especially when we have people that are telling us, play is not serious enough, I am not putting my child in your classroom so that they play. Have you heard this one before? Okay, I've heard it too. I've actually been told that one time face-to-face in a parent conference, which made me a little uncomfortable, but then I thought, okay, I can understand, so maybe I need something very tangible to give these parents. I need to tell them, no, I'm planning for this whole play to happen, for this whole learning to happen through play. I'm also monitoring, I'm also assessing so that I'm ensuring that these kids are developing some wonderful attributes that are part of these 21st century skills, by the way. So I need to give a bit more validity to my practice. So what I decided to do was to look at, I need to be able to document and to monitor the learning that's happening when children play. That's one thing that I'm required to do as a teacher. I need to be able to do that. The other thing I need to be able to do is to design learning experiences. And then also design or co-design learning environments. This is my responsibility as a teacher. So I need to do those two things to get to the learner profile, right? Let's keep the goal in mind. What I'm going to give you today, I'm going to give you 3 processes crucial for learning, which we can use to document and monitor children's learning while they play. And I'm going to give you 3 practical lenses, okay? So that you can design learning experiences in your classroom and think about play beyond the chocolate-covered broccoli, okay? I'm not sure how that translates, actually. Is that okay, chocolate-covered broccoli? Does it make sense? Okay. I always wonder about that. I used to be a language teacher, so I was like, am I saying things that are not translatable there? It's possible. But there's a problem now with this formula. What's the issue here? 3 times 3 equals 10. It's missing 1. I'll call it, because I'm a French speaker, je ne sais quoi. So we'll keep it like that. So it's missing 1 je ne sais quoi. So 3 times 3 plus 1 equals 10. Can you all remember that for today? If that's all you remember for today, we're good. So great. What I'm going to share it's going to be a lot of, talking to you about some of this research, but I feel it's very important to actually have these information, to actually have these tools to be able to stand in the classroom and give validity to children's ways of playing. So the 3 processes crucial for learning, to document and monitor learning that's happening during play, is actually been researched a lot. I've done some research with someone called David Whitebread at Cambridge University. This is another person you can actually look for on the internet, and he has tons of articles on learning through play. And his research has turned up that, for sure, every time children are engaged in a playful activity, not just a game, but in playful activity, usually self-initiated, but also adult-initiated, play will promote the development of those 3 things: self-regulation, language, and social skills. And I'm going to explain what these 3 are. And these are crucial aspects of development for young children, ages 3 to 6 in our schools, but before that, definitely, and also after that, actually. So what is self-regulation? Of these 3 crucial processes for learning, self-regulation, has anybody heard about this term before? Self-regulation? Yeah? can you give me some example of skills if we say that this is developing the awareness of one's own way of learning? It's basically knowing yourself, how you learn. So what are some skills to do that we can develop? Self-regulation. Some things that can be very observable, like taking turns. Stopping when you need to stop. Follow the rules, so knowing when to do something, choosing when to not do something. It's part of self-regulation. Anything else? Yes?
Asking questions or advice when you don't know something.
Knowing when to ask questions, knowing when you need the help. That's actually part of this process of learning to learn. This is all self-regulation. Other ideas? Practicing things, yeah. This idea of this perseverance of trying to practice and try again, this methodology that you have in your head, that you need to do it again, and maybe do it again, and do it again, that's part of self-regulation. This is crucial for young children's development. Another part of that, yes?
It's more like active learning and being an independent learner that rely on himself more than relying on general instructions.
Exactly. This plays a crucial role in students' agency. Agency is when they know how to take ownership of their own learning. Self-regulation is all those things, yes. So that's part of the social skills when you work together as a group, but as part of the group, you do need the self-regulation. Each individual child needs to have that self-regulation in order to say, let me listen to my friend here because he might have an idea. To stop and listen to somebody, it's part of social skills, but it's also knowing and developing self-regulation.
But it's confidence.
Yes, there's an aspect of confidence in here. There's an aspect of, I know this, I've done this before, let me try it again, or let me try it slightly differently. And to that, this confidence comes from this memorizing things. I know this. So memorization is actually a huge part of self-regulation as well. There's a lot of connections here between the learner profile and these processes crucial for learning, yes. That's the social skills, so we'll get to it. So I'm up in my 3 processes crucial for learning, right? We're trying to document and monitor children's progress, children's growth as they are playing. So we're looking for self-regulation. Can you see these pictures? Can you see self-regulation here coming up? These kids are waiting their turn to play on the tablet. Very important. Know when it's your turn, know when to let somebody else play. These kids over there trying to communicate, but at the same time building on their story, building on their sequencing. Why is self-regulation important? There's tons of studies that are coming up and emerging. This is a study by Moffitt that was done in 2011 that looked at the direct correlation between self-regulation of young people and their success in life. Obviously, they measured success in life with health, wealth, and crime, whether or not they were involved in crime, whether they were well-to-do, and whether they were healthy. We can also dream up of learner profile connections there. So there is an increased body of evidence that shows us that self-regulation is really important. Now, is this the only study? No, there's a lot of other ones. And of course, when I present research, it's always with a little pinch of salt, saying, you know, there's some limitation factors, there's a lot of things around studies that you always have to dig into. But it's kind of encouraging to see that there is a compelling body of evidence that tells us it's okay. If children, when they play, develop self-regulation, let them play. Look what this is doing. So the second aspect of development that we need to document, we need to monitor, we need to look for when we're actually watching children play and observing them play is language. So there's a lot of language skills going on when children are playing. These are pictures taken in South Africa, in Cape Town. These children were actually building a construction site in their school. They were doing role play, basically. And look at the amount of language that's going on. There is print recognition, there is discussing, there is visualizing, there is mapping, there's all kinds of things. Graphic representation, they were just drawing a lot of things. A lot of things around language is developing when children are playing. This is another study that supports that point. This is a study that was done by Sebastian Sugate in 2012. What he did was actually, because, language eventually leads to learning to read and write and all these good things that we do need to keep in mind. He actually had two groups of students or children that he actually studied over the course of the year between the ages of 5 and 11. The first group started formal reading. Formal reading meaning, starting decoding phonics, phonological awareness, all these things, but also going to print very quickly at the age of 5, and then they measured them again in reading at the age of 11. The other group was a group of students that was engaged in reading, formal reading, only at the age of 7, and were measured again at the age of 11 as well. And what they found is kind of interesting, is that basically there's no difference. Same reading levels in the two groups. Why is this study relevant for play? It's because Sebastian Sugate said, actually, it's interesting. I'm more interested now in what happens between 5 and 7, because they're not just at the same reading ability group, they actually have better comprehension if they started formal reading later. What's happening between 5 and 7 that creates this effect that children actually have better comprehension? They didn't lose in the game, they didn't lose time. What did they do between the ages of 5 and 7? What do you think? They played. But they were learning through playing. And actually, when you look at reading comprehension was better, that means that they had a lot of time to build theories, to think about things before they were handed out a worksheet and said, now write it down. Now try to write it down. We go very quickly to try to write it down. Now tell me what this is. Tell me what this is. And we don't let enough time for children to build their comprehension through play. So when they get to reading materials, yeah, they can read it, no problem. But maybe they don't have enough of that reflection, that theory building, that understanding and that comprehension that we're seeking to build with students. So that's another study. It's just one. Again, it's not all and everything, but it's compelling to see that there is an increased body of research that actually helps us give some validity to children's ways of learning, like play. And the third aspects that we need to be looking for, that we need to be documenting, that we need to be monitoring, is obviously the development of social skills. And I'm not going to spend too much time on that because this is pretty much the most obvious of all three, right? I think you've already said a lot. When children are playing, it's about cooperation, collaboration. They learn to talk to each other. They learn to negotiate. They learn a lot of things that are all of these social skills. It's learning how to behave when you're part of a collective. It's not always easy. So play does allow that. And when you look at these images there, you can see that there is definitely an aspect of building social skills, even though these games were all pretty much student-initiated. They decided to go and do this building site. They decided to play store. And all of a sudden, playing store became this negotiation, building power relationship. No, this time you keep the shop. No, this time I keep the shop. And see the roles reverting. This is quite interesting as well when you see children play. This is all social skills. Yes?
Sorry, I just wanted to say, going back to the study that you had before, I'm from South Africa, so seeing that 5 to 7-year-old change, some of the schools that I was at, they were very emphatic about not starting reading in grade 0 or in kindergarten, only starting in grade 1, and the parents were pretty insistent about not. they wanted them to have fantasy play and role playing, and I think that leads into the comprehension side of things. That allows for them to actually step into what's being said in a story versus getting the text and focusing on decoding plus what am I actually reading. So
the minute you put stress on children and okay, now you got to decode all of this, their focus on comprehension goes way out. So I think it's important to build both. I'm not saying one is bad and the other one is good, and you're right in saying that. And also I'm not saying that some contexts it might be more difficult because, you know, the approach to reading and writing is very different from one country to the next. Because you have mandates from your governments and different things like that. So, but it's important to say that if you do let children play, then you have more chances to allow them to build this comprehension in a more authentic way. You've heard this word a lot in this conference, make it authentic. If you come with a worksheet and something to fill in without that aspect of comprehension building from an authentic experience like play for children, then you might be at risk of losing an opportunity for building comprehension. Yeah.
Last year, actually, we did the research about the schools in Finland. One of the top countries that are doing really good in PISA exams. Last year, we did a research about Finland and like one of the best countries that do really good in PISA exams. And what's interesting is they don't really start schooling until the children reach to the age of 7. They have this philosophy that children must enjoy their childhood. On I think the night of their birthday, their 7th birthday, this is when they start to go to school. So whatever they do, like preschool and kindergarten, it's all about playing and enjoying their time and learning together. So this actually backs up whatever you are saying here, and even that research you discussed with that doctor you did.
Dr. Whitebread, yeah, Cambridge University. Yeah, very interesting person to look for on the internet. And of course, there are some countries that have more license to actually approach formal learning in a different way. So I'm not saying that, you know, just go ahead, you know, and no more formal teaching, because I think a lot of people would be, you know, running for the hills. But what I'm saying is that whenever you get a chance and children are actually playing in a more open way, look for these 3 things: the social skills, the language, the self-regulation that's being built, that's being developed, because those things, research tells us, are more important to children's success in learning than anything else. Okay, so when you're confronted with this argument of, you know, it's not good to let the children play, they're in school, well, there's different ways of building learning experiences that are conducive to play. And I'm going to come to this now because we've done these 3 things to use, these 3 lenses to use to monitor and document learning. Now we're going to look at 3 practical lenses where you can actually start building, co-building with the children, playful environment, play activities, and play engagement. White bread. It's on white, like white bread, like white bread, as opposed to brown bread. Yeah, yeah, but in one word. yeah. And actually, it's in the handout. So if you send me your email, if you send me a message, I will send you both the handout with all the references and the deck of slides. So no worries. So you say, okay, in some countries like Finland, like you mentioned, they can do all that stuff, you know. But me, in my classroom, what can I start doing? What can I start using as tools to start shaping play opportunities for children? And sometimes just letting them play, and what's happening during that letting them play. So in practice, I'm giving you now 3 practical lenses to design learning experiences in environments which will promote play as an inquiry-based learning, basically. And what we're going to look at, it's going to be kind of quickly, so don't worry, you can always go back to the handout to dig in a bit further into it. We're going to look at 3 practical lenses that will ask you to take back to your schools when you're actually thinking about building play opportunities in your everyday life with the children. One of them is the developmental stages of play. What types of play do you provide? What type of play do you actually plan for? And what types of play do you allow students to engage in on their own? So we're going to go over that. We're going to go and look at relationships. In the early years in particular, the role of relationships in planning activity is huge. Who is initiating what? Who's collaborating with who around a particular activity? Very important tool to build opportunities for learning through play. And then learning environments. As you saw in the first picture I was sharing with you, a lot of people think play-based learning, the environment must look like, stuff everywhere, completely disorganized. So I'm going to show you a bit of a balanced approach to that. Okay? So the developmental stages, this is interesting, and this comes straight from one of the papers from David Whitebread, where he's looked actually at how children actually over time develop play. And the first one is physical play. This is the more basic, it's most basic. Animals also engage in physical play. And this is something that's quite important for young children. That's almost like a basis for play. There has to be an entry into play through physical play. What they go on doing after that is they start playing with objects. And these two types of play have also been studied. I was referring to animals earlier. They were actually also studied in animals, which is always something that my colleagues find funny, because I do a lot of research on early childhood education in early years, and they always say, all the studies you always come up with for young children's development always have something to do with monkeys. It's actually true that you're looking at learning development of young children. Ethically, you can't open up, their brains and start looking and doing all kinds of things. So there's a lot of early childhood studies that have been developed, especially for these two types of play, looking at animals and ways of wiring brains through these kinds of play. What happens in the humankind, once they're gone through building on physical play and playing with objects, they start symbolic play. This is where they start actually playing with notions that are encrypted in our environment, in our ways of communicating. Music, some symbols, some letters, different things that are actually symbolic to them. And this leads very quickly into pretend play. They become a bit more sophisticated, they have their little codes, they have their little stories that are starting to build in their heads, and then they engage with each other and start pretending. Pretend play is quite complex. When you actually look at children and hear children playing and they're pretending, I think sometimes, honestly, they're more organized than I would be. When I'm trying to tell you a story and put together a presentation, I have to think so much about it, all the steps. But if you listen to a child play, children playing together, the sequencing that happens is amazing. And then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that. And then they introduce constraint. No, we can't because there's a big spider there. And then they keep on building the story. And when you think about the amount of thinking that goes into pretend play, I find that pretty fabulous. And I think we're not listening enough to it in order to capture really what children are able to do. And the fifth stage of play and development is basically games with rules. And this is the one here, because kids eventually get to that game with rules stage, they can all play, follow the rules. All of a sudden, all that we offer children is that. They get stuck in that, forgetting that the basis for all this good stuff with the games with rules came from physical play, playing with objects. And it's important to revisit those so that they keep building it and they have a more balanced approach to different types of play. One word that I want to also highlight is game with rules. Note that it doesn't say whose rules, right? I bet when you read that, you probably thought, oh yeah, it's all the games I do with my children in my classroom when I put the rules and we discuss and then we play. No. Games with rules can also be children making up their own rules. You can see very quickly the link between pretend play with the self-regulation that we saw before. Great link, great connection. They pretend play, and all of a sudden, their pretend play becomes a game with rules. Because all of a sudden, no, you're not allowed to go there because this is the doctor's office. Okay. And I'm not saying the doctor's office, but it's there. In their mind, they've established that. And then they build on that. Yeah.
Mike, please. Mike.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you heard, she said, oftentimes what we do is we start through there, and then we start going like, oh, but if I let go of that, and these rules, or this structure for this game, it's going to get all messy. It's going to go back to that first picture I showed you. And it's okay. I'm not saying good play, bad play. If you've noticed, there is not good play and bad play. But this might be, for a lot of you, might be your entry point into playing with children and letting the children play. Maybe that's what you know best to do, and it's okay. But what I'm asking you today is maybe consider going back and revisiting the other kinds of play. The other kinds of play that have actually led the children to where they are today. Yeah?
Just to make sure I understood, so physical play could be playground games like hopscotch or something more sophisticated. What do you mean by physical play?
Yeah, we're gonna go into an activity after where we're gonna explore the different types of play. But yeah, basically it's really the gross motor skills development when you're looking at. Obviously, physical play can very quickly evolve into play with objects. Let's say if it's hopscotch, it's mostly physical play, but all of a sudden they're having to grab something and do something with an object, right? But then there's also rules to that. So what I'm saying is that none of these are in silos because they've been building on each other over time. This is developmental, right? So they've been building on it. They're adding to that palette of different engagements for play. So it's rare nowadays that the child will only engage into one kind. But what happens a lot is that sometimes they only are allowed to engage in that last kind solely because of the way we've built the instruction.
And is this related to the age group? Should we start being free play and the pre-KG and then it goes up the type of playing with the grade?
There is an aspect of development here, and I appreciate your question. However, I think that a lot of children should be able to revisit their kinds of play as they need. Some people are sometimes better at engaging in physical play, and that's their entry into knowing. But there is a developmental notion that. Now, can I tell you exactly what's the age bracket? Won't be able to. But studies will tell you. Studies will tell you in a particular context, these types of play happened at this age range. Right, exactly. And it's for you. I don't know the children you have in your classroom, so you're going to have to do a lot of negotiation with your colleagues also if you have other people in your classroom that might believe different things about play. So you have to work here with them. But we're coming actually to this other aspect to start planning play and designing learning engagements that are playful is the lens of relationship. And this is where you can actually switch very easily between play and inquiry. Right? If you've done a lot of research, if you've done a lot of work with inquiry-based, if you're in an IB school, maybe you've learned a bit more at this workshop yesterday and this morning, if you're not as familiar with this approach. But basically what we're looking at is when we're planning or we're trying to think of designing learning activities that are more play-based, we need to start thinking about who is initiating this activity and who is directing or guiding this activity. I think these are two very important questions to ask when you're designing activities. And I'll encourage you to go back to your planning books, all this stuff, and look at all the activities you've proposed children with. And start looking at who is initiating and who's directing. And look after a whole day in your classroom, how many times did you get a chance to initiate yourself as a teacher, but how many times did the children have an initiation of an activity? So we're very familiar with The one where the adult initiates, you've planned it, it's on your book, you're going to do it, and you're going to direct it because by all means, anything can happen, it's going to get done. This is what we call direct instruction, okay? In my early days planning book, I have to say there was a lot of that going on because I just came out of college and I was like, I've just been taught how to do this and I'm going to do it. And the kids are going to do it with me. And then you start thinking about, well, maybe I want to open up a bit more this instruction pattern. And maybe I should let the children initiate and direct a bit more. And then what happens is you get into the child initiated and child directed and it's free play. And this is the tension that people feel all the time. Either you have to be in a direct instruction setting or you got to let the kids play. And a lot of people struggle between these two. What there is actually in teaching, there's actually a better balance to bring about if you consider that something that an adult initiated can also be child directed. You start it up and look who is directing, who's guiding. This is what this is an article that I'm also referencing, is calling Guided Play, Weisberg. It was very recent, published, and they've explored the role of They've explored the role of relationships in play. And so they said there is that other dimension, this guided play. But then what happens when the child initiates and the adult sees something very interesting going on? Have you been in that position where you're in your classroom, you're listening to the children, and all of a sudden somebody's starting a game, let's say, I don't know, playing with a bottle of water and looking at, oh, look, this is interesting. The water moves, always stays, you know, they do all kinds of game with it. And you're thinking, interesting. I'm actually coming up on a unit on water. Is there something else here that I can actually start very carefully asking question about and maybe taking note of so that maybe further on, I as an adult can step in and start co-opting in the play. It's almost like a collaboration between the children and the teachers, but this time you've let the child initiate. And you're actually building on this ability to observe, to take note, and to engage with children in their own initiated activities. So when we talk about teaching now, I would like you to start considering in your practice to expand. Don't stay in this box. And don't think that you got to jump straight away into that box. And because that's scary, right? Like sometimes it's like, ooh, I don't know how to do that. And so I would encourage you to start thinking that teaching is actually all four of these things. Teaching through an inquiry-based approach is all four of these. It's a good balance of times where the child initiates and the child actually guides. Or when you initiate, or when you guide. It seems a little bit boxy too. It never works like that. Nothing really fits in the box. But this is kind of helpful to think about. Let's go beyond the direct instruction here. And then the last lens, this is a practical lens to design learning environment, which is the environment. So it's a little bit of the same tension here. And maybe you can't read very well because the screen is not the greatest. But when you step into a classroom, what does it look like? It's highly organized. It's very structured. It's teacher-led. You see the teacher everywhere. The teacher usually is physically, you can actually notice this, above children. Look at the head of teachers when they're in the classroom. They're very often over the children. You see these pictures like in pamphlets of schools, and you always see the teacher with a book or something going, see? Okay, so you see this classroom environment is very much led by the teacher. It's very scripted teaching. And so people say, well, there's not really a lot of time to play. There's not a lot of room to play. Everything is sort of dictated in that way. Again, people say, well, what am I supposed to do then, Cecile? You want people to play. Okay, then what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to go to that end and say, this is laissez-faire, loosely structured classroom? There's ample play, so there's a lot of play. but there's no really adult support. It's basically turning into maybe a chaos, as we saw. It's like this feeling of people that if you don't do the structured classroom, automatically you're going to end up in that laissez-faire chaos sort of feeling. This article that I'm quoting here, which is called A Crisis in Kindergarten, and the reference is there, but it's also in the package, actually introduces the idea that there is also a balance to be made when you're actually planning your activities, when you're designing your learning environments, where you can bring about a bit more of richness, a bit more of interesting opportunities from the environment to let the children engage in inquiries and play. Yeah? Oh, sorry, yeah, I'm kind of in front of you. But this is in the handout as well, so you'll have, yeah. I have a handout already printed out, maybe not for everyone, but I'll send it later. So, I'm trying to see now for the time. Okay. So what I'm proposing now is that we have about 30 minutes left. Okay, I'm going to do an activity. It's going to be a little bit interesting, but it's to allow us to go a bit more deep into these three aspects of learning that are crucial for children, and these three lenses to organize learning and teaching. Okay? So what I'm going to do, this is going to be interesting. One half of the room is going to receive a ticket with a process crucial for learning. Okay? And the other half of the room will receive a ticket with one of the practical lenses, so the environment or the relationship and so on. So let me just bring it up and take the tickets for a minute. You have 1 minute of free time. Play. So we're going to see how this goes with this particular setup. Usually I have different setups for workshop style kind of thing, so it's going to be interesting. But basically you're going to have a ticket, and on your ticket you're going to have either a practical lens, which could be a developmental stage, relationships, or environments, or you're going to be getting a ticket with a process crucial to learning, with a focus on language, self-regulation, or social skills. Okay? Everybody has a ticket? Oh, in the back. So while we're waiting for everybody to have their ticket, I'm going to start bringing up images of children playing. And this is actually a little bit unfortunate that they're actually not videos, because with a video, you'd actually be hearing and discovering a whole lot more about these children. But we're going to go for static images for now, for the purpose of this workshop. But I want you to look at each image, imagine what's going on in the room, what's going on in the classroom, or outside, obviously. Maybe what went on before in terms of where's the teacher? If you have a lens of relationship, you can think about that. And what kind of learning is happening there? Especially if you have a lens of language, self-regulation, social skills, what kind of learning is going on there? Is there something you could actually report on, document, monitor from what you're seeing there? So it's just a set of different images. So just to yourself, I'd like you to think about your ticket and where it's actually present in these particular scenes. Playing with scissors. Ooh. Those were not cutting scissors, just checking. This is in Bangkok. This little boy, I don't know if you know these kind of things. They're chicken baskets. They carry chickens in these big baskets, and they had turned it over, and he started doing this. South Africa. This is a part of that little building site where this little girl had access to a book that had the palette of colors, and she was actually talking about what she wanted for colors and how we should paint this whole place. There's another one. Apparently, I've not traveled far enough because I don't have all context being represented here, and I would like to increase that. So I'll always welcome your input if you have things like that to share. But I'd like you to think and look at your ticket and think, okay, have you seen your ticket sort of represented alive there? If you were, for example, having relationships as a way to organize learning. If you were to look at environments, do you see how environments has been set up or maybe negotiated with children so that they could actually play and engage further? Have you looked at the different developmental stages of play? Is there a variety there? Do you see all of them somewhat represented? And then what kind of learning that's happening? Are you seeing, it's kind of interesting, are you seeing language? It's like, well, I think we can. Are you seeing self-regulation? And are you seeing social skills? Yeah. And I'm sure you have your own images. I'm sure you have plenty of those. But I would like you to start maybe considering with your images, your settings, your context, to start thinking about those different lenses I gave you today. And this is where we're going to actually skip a step here. And we're going to do a little bit of movement. So this is where we'll see how it goes. But try to find somebody who has a different ticket than you. Right? So we're going to get up and then find somebody who has a different ticket than you, preferably somebody from the other column, but it might not work out because we didn't have it pre-set up. And that's also what happens with play, by the way. If you don't set up everything ahead, I couldn't do that because somebody was presenting, right? So I couldn't set it up the way I wanted it, where usually everybody's got their little tickets all lined up. But then you have to be open to, oh, there's going to be something that probably won't work out the same way I actually imagined, but it's okay. So you're going to find a partner, and then you're going to talk about some of the images, and I'm going to bring them back. Some of the images, or maybe your own images. You might have your own descriptions of play in your context, where these two lenses are being demonstrated or used. Okay? So I'll give you maybe 5 minutes to do that. Find somebody that has a different lens than you. Chances are it's going to be across the room because one half has, and the other half, so come on over. I wanted to bring you back to the formula. So we've done 3 times 3 plus je ne sais quoi. We'll get to that. Equals the 10 attributes of the learner profile. So I would like you to continue that discussion you're starting, and this time thinking about the attributes that you were reading earlier, and looking at the design of the learning experience or the design of the learning environment, what children are actually learning, as in language, self-regulation, social skills. Do you actually end up seeing and envisioning that these attributes are right there? That we're actually getting to that. So take a couple minutes to think about it. Some of you had some earlier today, you had tickets, but you can actually look at all 10 of them. The interesting about the attributes of the learner profile is that very rarely you can single them out as one outcome. You have to always look at them in combination. So this is who we're starting to develop in our schools. They come to the table, they come to the learning table already equipped with so much, and we're trying to develop them further in their learning. These are the 10, actually. These are the descriptors, because you might have only gotten one earlier. If you're not familiar with the IBO learner profile, you can go on the website, and it's going to be there. So, I'm going back to the formula. So what's your +1? What's missing in this equation? Well, the child it's the learner profile, right? That's the child in growth and in development. There's no right and wrong, actually. What's missing? What would you like to add to that formula that you find very endearing when you think about trying to play more in your schools and trying to bring children? Love, that's a very good one. Yes. And there I am, I'm putting a judgment on it, but I like it. I just like it that in a teacher forum, you're actually talking about love. It's very important. Time, yeah. Yeah, and I know that this is a very particular notion, this notion of time, because depending on your context, you're going to be, as a teacher, allowed to devote more time or less time to certain things. But my query to you is, for the low time that you might have, if you do have to jump from, these and these and these kind of lessons, for the little time that you have, how do you value children's initiation for play? Children's ways of knowing and learning on their own, but also guided? Are you going to start looking at that time that you have in between these sessions, or sometimes on the playground in the recess? I don't know if you have recess here, but a lot of schools have recess time. And children go and play, and where are the teachers? Where? Walking around, yeah? Playing with them. This is more interesting. It used to be that teachers were over there. No? Okay. No, hopefully I gave you some tools to go back in the playground, playing with them, and start noticing that even all that time that they're engaged in their free play, the self-initiated play, they're still learning. Anybody else has a plus one? Your beliefs, your personal beliefs about, yes. Yeah. And this is why I started this presentation with my experience. I think it's very important in this process to go back to your experience, because we all have a particular view of play based on how we've experienced it ourselves. And then how you might have experienced it in your schooling as well. So it's important to do a revisit of that belief. Yeah, I like that, yeah. So, anything else? Yeah?
Give us, self-confidence. At last, we give them self-confidence, and this is very important to prepare them for life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. If you add self-confidence and you add that into the mix, I'm pretty sure that you'll eventually end up with a development of these attributes. But how do you give that self-confidence? Even this is one of my research questions. I've not solved this one, because we're talking actually in my office with all the people writing programs. We're talking about dispositions for learning and things like that. And it's like, how do you teach them? Are those part of the kids' life anyway? Do you add them into the mix because it's needed? No. Yeah.
You have to not organize, but you have to give them the comfort zone, because they leave their house, they're so young, and they come to this huge building, and you try to go back to their backgrounds, because it's holistic at the end, it's the whole of a child. So you make sure you have this comfort zone for them, so they can start communicating with each other, they start collaborating, because they don't know who's the boy and the girl next to you. And the extremely high level of competition nowadays, and the electronics, they don't know how to play, because it's so much easier to get the tab in his lab and compete. So the competition is very high there. The lack of trust who's next to you, what's happening, it's there. Mm-hmm. So I think it's breaking all this down and starting all over again. And then you have to have the support of the parents, and they want to do this, so the parents goes there, because you cannot do this alone.
Yeah, the plus one,
have to believe on you.
That would be an interesting one to add. The plus one could be the support of the parents. I've heard that a lot. Teachers are like, I told you I'm okay with this. I can take these lenses back to my classroom. I can take these design lenses as well, these practical lenses. I can aim to develop the learner profile with my learning community within my school, with my students, but I need parent support. So all the research that I've shared, and there is a little bit more literature that I'm listing in the handout, are good places for you to go back to do more reading. I've heard a lot of you are already engaged in master's program that's looking at young children's way of developing, to bring back this argument, bring back validity to children's way of playing and children's way of knowing. So it's important, since you were talking about love, here's a little heart. We all feel play is important. I think I see today, this morning, I've seen a lot of nodding, a lot of, yeah, right. We feel it's very important. Hopefully, now we know a little bit more about why it's important for children to play and learning through play. Maybe there's something else you might want to know that I didn't give you today, but maybe you have ideas and you have your own resources that you'd like to exchange. But what's very important is, what are you ready to do? What can you do in your own context about having children use play as their way of knowing, their way of developing, their way of investigating the world, and their way of inquiring? So I have a little sheet here for you to fill out if you want to tell me a bit more about yourself. What's your +1? If you want to write it down, I usually take a tab. So I've done this presentation. Actually, I started in Asia Pacific, and then I got feedback from people and I built on it. So I went back to, I think it was in the US, and then I got feedback from people and I built on it again, and I built on it. So you're getting actually the 4th round of it, which is probably has more research into it than all the previous slides. But I'm always curious to see from all the groups, what would be your +1? And I keep a tally of that. And then how do you feel about play and learning? It's also, we could say, play as learning, really. And then what would you like to know more of? So if we were to keep engaging in this dialogue, what's your next question? What's something you really would like to know more of in order to be able to do these things in your classrooms? And then what are you ready to explore today based on what you've heard, based on what you've read, based on what we've discussed together? Is there something that you feel, oh, I can do that, actually starting tomorrow when I get back in my classroom? And of course, give me your details if you have something to share. If you want to be in contact with me, I also keep people's information, particularly on this topic, but also anything that has to do with the early years. I'm quite passionate about this kind of field of research. So feel free to fill out this ticket. And I'm going to put the last slide on with my information. So you're welcome to send me an email if you would like the set of slides and the handout as a digital version, but I also have a handout here. There's only maybe 50 copies. No, that might be enough. So you can take a paper one, yeah. And then, can I ask a helper? Yeah, there you go. So you have 2 pieces of information, and I wanted to leave you with a resource that was just published, and I actually have not read it yet. So I like to put it up there in case you're interested about reading more about play. This one is interesting because it goes beyond the early years. It actually goes up to age 12, which is what the primary years program of the IB does. It's yeah. So there is a reference there. It might not be in the handout actually because I just added that. It's quite new. It was published in March, I think. Oh yeah. And then my new friend will pass out. There you go. I wanted to thank you for coming this morning. It's quite an intense weekend, so I appreciate your engagement and your interest and your